We will tonight. This will be a short, abbreviated study, but we will look at a few verses in our time tonight, and we are continuing in the Gospel of Mark. And we left last time there in Mark chapter 2. So that's where we're at, Mark chapter 2. And we are going to pick up with verse 23. Like I said, this is abbreviated, very short teaching tonight. We won't go over for very long here tonight. If you recall, last time we spent a lot of time where Jesus was being questioned about fasting and how that the disciples of Jesus and of John the Baptist, how that they did not fast, but they said that others did. And so Jesus was teaching a great lesson about the idea of the difference between law and grace. That somehow that you could not add law to grace. And that grace is what Jesus brought. And so there was a great teaching right there. So we continue on, and we'll look now at the 23rd verse, and my heading for this group of verses is Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. Lord of the Sabbath. Let's read these verses 23 and 24. Now it happened that he went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. And as they went, his disciples began to pluck the heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why do they do what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Once again, I want you to understand that on the Sabbath that you were not supposed to walk for any distance, and you were not supposed to do things. So even these Pharisees on that day, they were breaking the law themselves by following along after Jesus, trying to find things that he was doing wrong. But anyway, it was normal for pathways to crisscross the fields and as roadways. And because real roadways were very scarce. So in other words, they would cut through the grain field to get from one place to another. And if you were to go to another passage in Matthew 12:1, we find that the disciples were hungry. And then according to Luke 6:1, it says they picked the grain and they rubbed it in their hands to get off the husk or whatever, and then they ate the grain. So you see a complete picture of what they're doing. So they're walking through this grain field, as it tells us here in Mark, and it says they begin to pluck the heads, and according to Luke, they rubbed it in their hands, and they were able to eat the grain. And actually, if we were to look at this, and I hesitate to take time to do this, but if you look in Deuteronomy, sometimes it's good we'll just take time with what the passage we can work with. And if you look in Deuteronomy chapter 23 and verse 25, it tells us a little bit about this law that the Pharisees were talking about. But in Deuteronomy 23:25, now, here we go again. This really goes back to our pre-Bible study discussion tonight, okay? Whether this is subjective or absolute. But look what it says there in Deuteronomy 20. These are the laws that were put into effect by the Levites and all. God gave the laws to the Levites. And listen to this one. Verse 23 says, "When you come into the neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the heads with your hands, but you shall not use a sickle on your neighbor's standing grain." All right, so we've got to be careful here. They had the right, according to the law, to pick that grain. It says they could do that. But what was the problem? The problem was that they were doing it on the Sabbath. So they were in their right to pluck the grain according to the law in Deuteronomy, but the problem was that they were doing it on the Sabbath. Okay? But the Pharisees, they were saying that disciples were breaking the Old Testament law. And like I said, what had happened is that the Pharisees had elevated themselves over the Old Testament law, and they were adding to these man-made traditions. And so what are you saying? I'm saying that now they said that they were the authority about what you could and couldn't do on the Sabbath. All right? And so that was the problem there. The Pharisees were trying to be the policemen of the Scripture. They believed that they were policing and making sure that everybody kept the Sabbath day observances according to their understanding. Well, let's go ahead and try to finish this story. And then in verse 25, but he said to them, have you never read what David did when he was in need and hungry, and he those with him, how he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the showbread, which is not lawful to eat except for the priest, and also gave some to those who were with him. Once again, Jesus showed his great knowledge and authority over Scripture. He exposed their ignorance of the Old Testament law and the Old Testament. And the account that Jesus is referring to, we're not going to read that, but it's found in 1 Samuel. If you're writing this down, 1 Samuel chapter 21 and verse 6. But in that instance, then God did not punish. He didn't punish the priest Abiathar, and he didn't punish David for their actions. All right? And so we see here that in this instance that God, what he did was he allowed ceremonial law. It was ceremonial law that they not eat this showbread, the bread that was in the temple. And the reason he did that, so that there was an urgent human need, and so God allowed them to eat that bread. Well, what Jesus' point is in both those instances that we referred to here, in Deuteronomy and here, and we're trying to show that showing compassion in God's sight always trumped strict adherence to ritual and ceremony. Get to thinking about that. So in other words, Jesus taught this in another place. But what he was saying, that if you see a person in need, and even on Sunday, we help that person. See what I'm saying? If we see somebody in a ditch out here and we can help them, then we go and help them out of the ditch. I'm trying to use a new example of an old example. You see what I'm saying? But if we did that, if we left this church here, and we went down the road and somebody was out there with a flat tire, and we stopped and started helping them, if we had the Pharisees, then they would come back and say that we were violating the Sabbath. You see what I'm saying? And even though God tells us that, that's what we are to do. We are to help one another. We are to help our fellow man. Even though they believe in their own idea about ceremonial law and ritual, they believe that ceremony and ritual was more important than helping your fellow man. Verse 27 and 28. And he said to them, this is our focus right here, and we'll conclude tonight. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath. Isn't that a great statement there? In other words, what he is saying is that God never intended that ceremonies or rituals or tradition to stand in the way of the mercy, the kindness, the goodness toward one another. Jesus then claimed to be the sovereign ruler over the Sabbath. He is the authority and ruler over the Sabbath. I think that what the problem is that by adding to, the Pharisees were adding to, and it was like a weight. It was like, you couldn't help someone because you had the weight knowing that you was breaking some tradition or some ceremony. Jesus says, "Here I am here to lift that weight." He says, "My yoke is not heavy." He says, "What I have for you is not burdensome." You see what I'm saying? He doesn't want it to be a burden. He doesn't want, we get to the point where he doesn't want our Christianity to be a burden. We help someone, we'll just put it out there in the quotation marks, out of the goodness of our heart. I haven't said this for a long time. What is good? Only thing that's good is Jesus. When we help somebody, let's think about it. When we help, this is my quotes. When we help somebody out of the goodness of our hearts, it's because Jesus rules our hearts. That's how I believe. There should not be burdens. There shouldn't be burdens. How many times have you done that? You say, "Oh my goodness, I don't want to stop on the side of the road," or "I don't want to go over there," or "I don't." But then when you come home, you feel so blessed. So blessed. Aren't you glad you went back? Aren't you glad you stepped in? Aren't you glad you said that word? Aren't you glad that you gave that person encouragement? It don't have to be work. Encouragement, or that you prayed for somebody, or that you would go on and on and on. That you took your precious time that God has given you, given that little bit, out of the goodness of your heart, because Jesus lives in me, then I am willing to do this. What a great teaching tonight. We could spend much more time when he talks about being the Lord of the Sabbath. But really all he was saying there is that I am the Redeemer. I am grace. We are living in a time of grace. The law, I came to fulfill the law. And he quotes the law over and over again tonight. I am the fulfillment of that. And he says, I did not come to put it away, but to fulfill the law. But now we are saved by grace through faith. Well, that's our teaching tonight. I know it's an abbreviated teaching, but we'll pick up there next week.